I'm going to invite Sarah FitzGibbons to moderate this next panel. Sarah is a socially engaged participatory theatre maker, and she is also a lecturer in drama and education at TU Conservatoire Dublin. Sarah, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. What a great day.
It's been fantastic. And I'm going to pass over to you to introduce your panel.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, Claire, for your paper. So my name is Sarah FitzGibbons, and I would like to welcome our panelists for this section. We have Melody Chedemayu and Nelta Chedemayu from the SoloSIRENs collectives, who are devisers and performers on Falling. We have Jenny MacDonald, the author and performer of Enthroned and director of Falling. We have Deirdre Malloy, the director of Baggage, which was written and performed by Nicole O'Rourke, who was on our earlier panel, and Veronica Coburn, director of Sweet About Me, written and performed by Jacinta Sheeran. We're also delighted to be joined by Sarah Jane Scaife, artistic director of Company SJ and professor in Trinity College Dublin. And lastly, but by no means least, Sarah Sinnott, who provides us with a unique insight as someone who engaged as an audience member throughout the festival. So welcome to you all. I'd like to thank Claire for her paper. On a personal level, when I first read it, I actually got very emotional. I was very affected by the research that you alluded to about the synchronicity of heartbeat in performance, which we were all kind of missing. And I sincerely hope that we have more of those shared moments of communal engagement in the not too distant future. However, the main thing I took from it, which seems to be a current conversation, and thank you to Melissa for giving us those very concrete actions to address our own language, was the nature of dialogue among women, creating this collaborative floor where the voices combined to construct a shared text. And I think that really resonates with the energies around SoloSIRENs. And so I'd just like to throw that to some of our panelists. Was there anything about this jam session devised by a collective, the Solos and the Sirens, that surprised you? And so I'd like to ask that to Nelta and Melody as a starting point, if they are here.
Yeah, so I'll start. Yes, actually, yes. What surprised me, I've never performed before. This was my first time ever, and I didn't know what to expect. So what surprised me was how the story that we performed in the end came about. That initially it just seemed like little bits of conversation. We were having a lot of fun. I didn't see how that was going to actually become a concrete thing that we could show anybody. Even when we were in the Abbey at the end of the 5 days and we had something, we performed for 20 minutes and we were like, oh my God, we did something, you know? So that surprised me. The other bit that really surprised me was how caring Jenny is as a director. It's like you really felt like you were going home. And I'm not saying this in a minimalistic or trying to be cliche. Like going home for me when I got my mom and she holds me in her arms is like my safety place. I put my head on her chest and I feel safe. And that's how I felt every time I was interacting with Jenny. And also how open everybody was, how everybody was so free to give out or to share those parts of themselves they'd never shared with anybody sometimes, and those parts of themselves that worried them sometimes. You know, like you don't know how people are going to react when you tell them something. But it was all held, nobody kind of cried or anything, but it was all held with compassion, kindness, and caring. That was really surprising to me.
I'm curious, as an audience member, Sarah, if you could feel that holding, I mean, and that kind of layered collaboration of sharing and holding of story, could you, as an audience member, see that?
Yeah, when we were watching it, when I was sitting there, I could just feel the connection between everybody and the support that was there. It was very powerful. It was just, you could just see everybody was flourishing, especially in the group performance, the last one. It was just, it was very powerful and moving to see everybody together, and you could see the comfort, and as Melody said, like they looked like they were all home. They'd found a safe space, and it was just wonderful to see women supporting women in theatre and just seeing that all together. It was just, yeah, it was great to see it from the outside. You could just really see everything that had been done.
And in terms of that communal feeling of being in that shared theatre space and having that, you know, where you were synchronizing neurologically and physically with other audience members, did you feel in sync with the performers or in sync as an audience, or both?
I think it was both, because it was such an intimate space as well, that you could feel everybody around you was feeling a similar feeling and watching them, but you're also connected to the performers because you could feel the emotions they were feeling as well. It was just a very kind of spiritual experience, I guess, as well as an emotional one.
Was it a surprise that it was that way?
Yeah, a little bit, the way that you could just connect with a whole room of people just through, like, I'm involved in performance, but just seeing that and the whole room was just together, it was slightly surprising, yeah.
Excellent. No, and does anybody else want to come in on that? Was there anything else about this jam session that surprised you? Jenny, sorry.
You're good. Something that was interesting for me, I suppose I've done this this devising process with a number of groups. So the idea of the devising process as a jam session, when I read Claire's paper, I was like, yeah, that's very familiar, and that's what I experienced. But I was interested to see that jam within the collective also become a jam with the solo shows and with the audience. And the degree to which that happened surprised and excited me. And we definitely found these commonalities. I mean, grandmothers, there was a grandmother in every show. There was a grandmother who was like the star and the savior almost in every show. And then there was a mother, poor mothers. There was a mother with whom there was conflict and there was friction. And so there are these similarities, but also there were marked differences. And I think what was exciting about that for me was that we were such a diverse group. So these stories were going from Libya to Canada to Zimbabwe to Ireland. And so in some ways, the joy of the jam was when the stories didn't match. So I was so struck by Melody saying in the talk back after Enthroned, I never grew up with this princess story. I mean, you know, so that was so important for me to hear, because it was, I needed to tell my kind of excavation of doing something different than that story. But it was also really important for me to hear there are many places in the world where that's not the story. You know, there are a lot of stories out there. So I was surprised by and excited by. We've talked so much about the support and the agreement and the moments we all came together, but I was also really excited by the moments where we could be really different from one another. Exactly,
and sharing those common experiences or uncommon experiences in what becomes that kind of internalized structure that we kind of all can suffer from. That's really interesting. In terms of you were talking about holding space and it being a very safe space, and I've watched your process, Jenny, from the outside. Is there something to be said about this female generative space that this festival addresses that the more traditional festivals and commissioning models don't? And I'd like to just throw that out to the wider panel, maybe including Deirdre Malloy and Veronica and Sarah Jane. If you'd like to throw in your mics. Aha. There you are.
Yes, I have unmuted. I immediately sort of go, what was the question?
I can give it to you again if you want.
Well, I think what I'm interested in a little bit is I think what I was struck by with SoloSIRENs Festival and a lot of talk about the work is the place of participation. So it's not a straightforward model, as you say, the straightforward commissioning model of we commission the professional playwright. It is written, it is performed by professional actors and presented in a professional venue. So I think it's really interesting how that space, we would refer to it, I suppose, back in, I would share the 80s with Jane. But back then we would have used terms like community theatre. But the role of participation and participatory arts and all of that, and the rise of that, along with probably in gender terms with the freeing up of the female voice, is really interesting. Because again, one of the dynamics we have is the fact that if you put a call out for a participatory project, 95% of the people who respond will be female. And one little observation I would sort of make as well is that as we talk about the feminine and female within the theatre and our roles and our places and apologising, is that even how we talk about general theatre, it's always that sense of maybe one of the things that are really interesting about models like SoloSIRENs is that you put those voices, you put that work center stage, you put that audience center stage, and you don't apologize for it. So you just say, here we are, isn't this fantastic? And actually, if you put that further out into general theatre, you say, maybe we should stop apologizing for the fact that predominantly audiences are female, predominantly audiences are older females, and rather than say, oh, we should sort of say, we should be a bit embarrassed or a bit shy, or let's look for the others. Why don't we say, we're here? So, this is fantastic. Let's not look for what is not. Well, of course we should, but let us not, in looking to expand those audiences, to disrespect or have no regard for the audience that is there.
I have you completely. Deirdre Malloy, have you anything to add to that?
I come from a kind of a unique background in that I work as an artist, as an actor and a director, but I also work behind the scenes on festivals and events. And it's nearly all women who are on the teams that I work on. So it's very interesting to ask that question, or to be asked to think about why are there not more female events on festivals. I feel that in a rehearsal room, a mixed gender rehearsal room, so every rehearsal room is vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Everybody feels vulnerable, including the director. It was interesting, Melody saying that Jenny was a really caring director, because that's a massive part of the role of a director, is to take care of everybody in a rehearsal room. But the director themselves are vulnerable as well, and they're constantly questioning themselves and having to question others. So there's this massive vulnerability that I find within a stronger, where there are more women or all women, that vulnerability is sort of taken care of. You don't need to think about it, because it's just there. People are looking out for each other, and you do have, like, it was interesting, Jane saying that she was 35 years in the industry. I'm 30, and Jane would have been a massive role model for me in my early 20s, because she was general manager of Druid, and I toured with the show, with the Druid show at the time. And she just, like, very subtly on the sidelines taught me a lot about taking care of yourself as a woman in general, in life, but also in theatre. And they're just that question is constantly coming up of why do we have to?
Yeah.
Why does it, and I just, the tools that Melissa gave in what she said, and that Patricia gave, just like having an old dance. That was amazing after lunch. Like, I am going to start every day now and every post lunchtime session with like 3 to 5 minutes of dancing, because it's just a great thing to do. But I just think that women are brilliant at coming up with stuff like that. And I know we've said it incessantly, minding each other. But I keep going back to the question, as others have, which is why do we have to? Why is this still a thing? you know.
And that's partly sort of in terms of like, I mean, I know that we exist slightly outside of what might have been, like this is a festival that's specific and has given us so much food for conversations. And I'm just wondering, is that what we need more of? Is that something that, you know, that we talked a lot about collaborative creation. So you, as a female director, and Veronica worked with a female creator, writer, a director, you know, performers on your pieces. Is there something within making more space for that more generative work, do you think?
I think it's important to have festivals like this, and to have, you know, for me personally, to work with somebody like Nicole, who we've done so much work together now at this stage. We've a great shorthand, but we also, and I said this in the panel discussion after Baggage, we come from the same kind of moral, ethical thinking. And it felt, being in and around SoloSIRENs, it felt that was there with everybody. I mean, not everybody at all times, but there's a feeling of we're all in this together, and a feeling of, I suppose the thing that was most important about it for me, and then last summer I also for the first time worked in an all-female cast in the Abbey. Where you walked into the rehearsal room and you felt like you were walking into a big hug every day. Like it was, I had never felt that before. It was just an absolute joy. What it has taught me personally and professionally is how things should not be. And how from here on, there are things that I just won't accept within a rehearsal room. There are attitudes and behavior patterns that I, you know, 30 years on, I can now go, okay, that's something I won't put up with. In
the sense of where Melissa was sharing that very practical thing, I'm just aware I want to bring in Sarah Jane on this. Can you give us an example of what those like? That's the line. That's the thing I won't tolerate. Just in terms of a practical thing, like Melissa gave us with the language.
In a word, bullying.
Yeah.
You know, and there are so many different versions and so many different levels of that, but that's the summation of what I'm talking about. No,
that's good. Thank you very much for sharing that. Sarah Jane, if I could bring you in on the same question, what do you think this festival hits that others may not?
Okay, so I feel like a total cheat because I only got in through this because Martha, who is a student that I was working with,
and she's amazing.
Yeah, you know, she's just amazing, and I heard about this through her, so I was really, really interested. But I have no experience of the festival. Nothing. So I'm an absolute and utter cheat. So I'm kind of sitting here wanting to move my little window off the screen.
Well, let me ask you maybe a question in a broader context then that might sort of, like we've talked a lot about female spaces. So what do you think makes a feminist theatre creation space?
Okay, so, and I've thought about this, and I realized that I've probably been doing it, but without knowing the terms and without knowing everything. And I remember and Melissa's piece was hilarious because it was like she was talking to me. I felt like saying, oh, stop it. You know, I even have on my email now that I use in college, I have, you know, it keeps on kind of giving me flashing lights to stop using all the language that I use to try and soften things or make me less abrupt or aggressive, you know, and it keeps getting me to be more direct. So I just thought that was very interesting with Melissa's thing. But back when the Waking the Feminists whole thing exploded, I remember talking about the fact that, you know, I mean, I won't even go into all the bullying and all the ridiculous nonsense that happened in the world when Ireland was just totally controlled. Theatres, writers, producers, directors, everything was men. And I would be having screaming matches in the Abbey with Noel Pearson or whatever, or James Flannery or whoever it was, and constantly being this short, Dancer was another one, because that was another thing you shouldn't really be, because you were speaking from the body, good grief, you know, not from the intellect. So being a female and a kind of, not that I am a dancer, but having had that kind of background reduced me to like this. So I was constantly, as Melissa was talking about screaming, I was constantly shouting. And I think people actually thought I was funny, almost. The guys kind of, ooh, what a cute little red-haired shouty thing in the room, you know. I mean, that's really what it felt like, you know. So at the Waking the Feminists thing, I was saying that, you know, I got sick of waiting to see would a male director cast me. I got sick of waiting for everything in life. And so I just started doing my own work. And so I think a lot of women around that time, they found their own space because they could not bear to wait, and they could not bear to be bullied in the situation they were in. So I'm not really, you know, I put my hand up so much throughout my life and my childhood and everything that I stopped kind of doing that, and I just started trying to do my own work. So I found a space for myself, and it was outside the main frame. And it's not like, I was trying to say this to Jenny the other day, it's not like I necessarily wanted to go back into the main frame. I didn't. I found the space, I liked it. So, you know, I was out there exploring, and then the fringe becomes the main. So now areas that a lot of women were exploring, like community, like site-specific, you know, like working with community, like going around the world, working with women all around the world, you know, that wasn't cool. And I was doing all this work in Asia and stuff, and because I wasn't doing stuff on the Abbey or in the Peacock or in the project, and I wasn't, you know, going around the little circle that we are, when I came home from places, it was like I had never existed, do you know? So it was weird, but I didn't want to go into that main space. You know, I wasn't interested in that main space. And I think that a lot of the women created this fringe that is now becoming the main space. You know, now site specific, for instance, our community engagement, it's all in the main space now. And what we have to, I think, be afraid of or wary of is that main space that's being made up now of all the fringes, that we don't become institutionalized or tight or boxed in like they were, you know. And so that's the only thing I would say, is that I feel like through my work on Beckett, who is a man, very specific, I feel like I've been injecting the woman into him. I mean, it's like, I think there's male Beckett or boy Beckett and girl Beckett. And the boy Beckett is kind of, this is probably a really awful thing to say, but it's kind of like showing the intellect and the philosophical and the depth of the argument. And the female Beckett is sneaking in and trying to find what, you know, what's going on with the characters. Why are they feeling so fucking, you know, lost and meaningless, or is there a meaning in their meaninglessness? And is it just that he's created a space where those voices can be heard? And specifically the women's plays in there, and to have a rehearsal with women is completely different to having a rehearsal with men. And I've worked with both, and I love them both really deeply with both groups. But I can kind of manage the men. I can't manage the women, because they will just, it's like, it's exhausting. You know, Joan Davis, incredible woman in her 70s, dancer. Michelle Forbes, incredibly intelligent performer. Brittany Nocton, unbelievable experienced woman. And I would come out of the day with them, you know, drained, because every single word, every single line. I remember saying to Joan once, you know, after I had bent over backwards, trying not to tell her how to say something, but to give her way in to say it. Does that help at all, Joan? And she went, no, not really. No, actually, it doesn't really help at all. And, you know, so you know, it's a whole different space. But even in terms of the shows we did, like you were talking about the audience, and we brought our audience. It was as important for us to respect the audience, and just, there was a community of audience. And Kate, not laughing. Oh my God, I'm having a senior moment. Kate Lennon. Okay, so she was amazing. And I've only realized now really how amazing she was. Like, we would go and look for sites and spaces and everything. But she organized she would get all the people from the festival that were there as helpers. And she would literally talk to the audience when they came into a building or a site or wherever we were. And she would say, you know, we've only limited amount of seating and we've only limited amount of different, you know, can you please be careful for your audience? Can you look around and can you see, is there somebody shorter with maybe problems sitting, problems standing? You know, can you please, you know, generate a sense of kindness to your audience members? And it was quite amazing because the audience then took care of the piece, and they, you know, when they were moving from space to space, they really became aware of each other in the process of witnessing these women's stories that weren't these mad women that a lot of the time is portrayed, you know, the Beckett women. They were women who really had a story to tell, and they were very clearly trying to tell their story in a very difficult, crazy scenario of a male world. And, you know, for me, that was amazing. You know, I don't even know what, because I have no idea.
No, because I think what you, if I was to sort of condense down a couple of the things that you said there, one of them was, if you don't like the sort of generated rules of the game, go and make your own game. Which I think is a very important one for us to give permission to the younger generation of theatre makers coming up, that, like, you know, you can create the rules of your game and make your space as you wish it to be, once it's with respect and those kind of things. But the other thing that I'm curious about is that sense of, do you think a feminist theatre space, or one that tells a female story, is a more inclusive space by its very nature?
I do think that, especially in the dance area as well. But I just would have a little warning thing in my head going, don't create the same restrictions that became embedded. Because you look at the Arts Council criteria now, you know, social engagement, this is the big buzzword now. And it's the whip that you're going to, you know, lose funding over. Again, you know, I don't know. I think that, you know, really interesting things are created at the fringe, and they come in and then they get boxed off into, okay, now we know what the answer is. Now we know what to do, and this is what we're going to do. And you have to fit into this now. I kind of would love the idea of it just constantly, you know, fluid, which is, I suppose, what women do.
I can see Veronica Coburn nodding a lot to that, so I'd just like to invite her to come in and maybe respond to that, because you were nodding sagely there, Veronica.
Oh yeah, that's yes, that's just a facade. I tell you, I would like to sort of hop back in, and I'd like to sort of take a little backward step, which is that notion of, do we need festivals like SoloSIRENs? And what I would say, so I'm going to take a little step sideways first and come back to that, which is, I run a program called Tenderfoot in the Civic, which is for transition year students. So 15, 16-year-olds, we bring them in every year. It's about shaping and giving space for a youth artistic voice. So core to it is that young people write plays. So we've been going since 2007, and I love these little numbers. So just before we started, I suddenly thought, oh, I bet you these numbers will be useful. So every year we take about 50 students. In the first year it was about 35, now it's about 50. This year we're taking 65. We'll have to stop that at some point. So since 2007, we have had 571 15 and 16-year-olds take part in our program. Now, in the program, we write plays, but we also do set design, costume design, music composition, and they get to perform and they get to do stage management. So not all of them write, but of the 571 young people who have come through our hands, 224 of them have written plays. Some of those plays have been 3 pages long. Some of them have been 40 pages long. Of the 224 plays written, we have produced because it's not about keeping it on the sidelines. It's about putting it on the stage. We have produced 82 of those plays written by 15 and 16-year-olds, and they are performed to a peer audience. So a peer audience see work that is from their viewpoint. Of the 82 plays that we have produced since 2007, 64 have been written by young women. That is 78%. So
that is amazing.
Well, you see, the interesting thing is, now there's loads of digging to be done there. I'm not saying anything, but there's loads of digging. But the numbers do speak for themselves. So what is interesting is what happens. So obviously at age 15 and 16, young women are quite capable of writing plays and saying, this is my voice, put it up there on the stage. So what happens between the time that they're 15 and 16 and that they're 24, 25-year-old young writers? Where are those voices then? So there's something in terms of the system that means they get lost, or they are ignored, or they are not supported in the intervening years. So what I would say is, in terms of a festival like SoloSIRENs, is it needed? Yes. We want to get to a point where we do not need festivals like SoloSIRENs. We want to get to a point where we want festivals which are specifically about women's work. We want them because we can enjoy them, but not because we need them. And the other little point I'll make in there is the notion of a cumulative effect. I think the usefulness of a festival rather than a one-off play. So 3 plays by professional artists alongside a play that is participatory in nature is fantastic, because individually they will all make a mark, but collectively they make a bigger mark. It's the same with our young people in South Dublin County. If we'd stopped after year 1, it would just go poof. It's taken us, this is now our 14th year, 14 years later, finally the numbers are gathering so that it has some sort of meaning. So I think for now we do need, and we probably need more, so that we get to the point when we don't need.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be chased off because we're running over time, but I have to say it was just fabulous. I think one of the things that I think I will certainly take away from this conversation, and I'm so glad to see so many people who are involved in 3rd level education in theatre and drama studies here, that call, like what happens to that between 16 and 24. And I think that the onus is on us to make sure that those internalized, you won't be heard voices get stopped and nipped before they overtake these young female writers. Thank you very much for that, Veronica. So I'm going to hand over to Jennifer Webster before she comes after me with things.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to your panel. Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes to open up to the floor to any of the attendees who would like to ask a question to your panel. So we will begin now in a second. Just waiting on those questions to come in. So to ask a question, you can either put a question into the Q&A. If you'd like to ask the question live, just type in live and we will promote you and you'll be able to see your face there. So
while we're waiting for questions, can I just say one thing that came to mind while listening to Sarah Jane and Veronica there. As a young woman and as an older woman, I have all of my life, by people who were very important in my life, been told to be less emotional. Women are too emotional. We calm down, relax, rein it in, and like, fuck that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we should be emotional, and women are emotional, and we should let it out, and we should allow whatever we're feeling to be out there, and not feel like we have to behave in a male manner in order to be heard. I don't mean scream and roar and rage. I mean, do that by all means, but but don't be afraid of being emotional.
I think you're dead right. I think because Claire's paper really brings, just to bring it back, because I love that idea of bringing things around to a full circle, in the sense that Claire's the conversations that I've had, having read Claire's paper about the nature of female dialogue being different to men, being different to that taking the floor and stepping back, being that collaborative, almost patchwork quilt in which emotions are readily shared and echoed and mirrored and so on like that, has had a very transformative effect, I know, on how I view conversation. And I think that's a very interesting thing in terms of shouting and roaring, being emotional, but having other people chime in and say, you're right to be. You know?
Okay, first question, and let me know who would like to answer it. Is there a female aesthetic, not just a female perspective? Who would like to answer that? Sarah Jane. We'll unmute you now, Sarah Jane.
And just really, really quickly, because I don't want to take, because I just think there definitely is, because over the years, if you look at critics and if you see the way they view things, it's very, very different how a male critic will write about a show they've seen and a female critic, I feel. So I think it's in some way, the way they're looking at the piece really changes, it seems to me. I can remember a show we did years ago in the Peacock where we added a lot of very slow movement before a Yeats play. Literally, the critics were split in two. The men ranted and raved and said, how dare you? And the women went, oh my God, you know, we were brought into this other kind of space and this other world. And it was literally so completely different. And I've noticed it over the years reading critics. So if, you know, I think there has to be a different aesthetic there. It's more layered or something, I feel like, with women. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I think it's more layered, possibly more subtle, the female aesthetic.
Thank you. Thank you. How do we empower the younger feminist voices in continuing the legacy of SoloSIRENs into the future? So whoever would like to take, I'll repeat it again. How do we empower the younger feminist voice in continuing the legacy of SoloSIRENs into the future? We've got Melody. Thank you.
So I think that being an immigrant to Ireland, I find that there's a lot of, and we do that to each other actually as women sometimes, especially with younger women. We tell them to shut up a lot. We also try to control them, to tell them not to express themselves. Like one of my daughter's friends, way back when they were in primary school, used to say, I love coming to your home because sometimes your mom just goes into a dance and it's fun. Whereas if I laugh too loudly, my mom tells me to shut up. Don't do that. Don't do that to your girls, because it starts there. By the time they're 15, 16, it's already usually too late because they already formed what they think is how they should be. So allow young people to express themselves and to say what they want to say. And even if you don't agree with it, you can just listen. You don't have to comment. And yeah, so I think that's all I can say on the subject.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add to that as well. It's something that came to me from one of my brothers, actually. I was telling one of my nieces one time how gorgeous she is. You're so beautiful. You're so pretty. And my brother Aidan said to me, would you mind, like, that's grand, but would you mind also, you know, like every time you talk to her about being beautiful, will you also just be sure and tell her she's really smart and she's really strong as well? And I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that? You know, like, it's such a basic thing that you know, these are just ways that we communicate with young women that is so ingrained in us. And, you know, so just make a point of telling young women that they're smart and they're strong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Courtney Helen Gryle would like to ask a question live. Can we promote her there? We have so many questions that are coming up in the Q&A. We will have an informal chat after the symposium, and hopefully maybe we can get to some of those questions then. My apologies, we're kind of tight for time. So if we can promote Courtney there.
Hi, thank you. I had to ask this live because I am still working out the question in my head, but it's around the idea of the Waking the Feminists. Prior to coming to Ireland to start my PhD studies, I was working with a regional theater company in San Francisco, in which I experienced being told, A, not to be so emotional, and then being accused of not caring about something when I was trying to not be emotional in this space. And it's kind of nerve-wracking, and it's really inspiring to hear about the alternative spaces that have been created and have been taken over by women. But I wonder if those of you who have been in Ireland since the Waking the Feminist movement, if you have seen a change in women's voices within theaters around Dublin, so in the alternative spaces, but also in those mainstream larger institutions as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, but not enough would be my answer. We need more.
Would anyone else like to respond to?
Yeah, I mean, Jen is great in the Abbey, I have to say. You know, she's a constant open ear. Yeah.
No, I would totally agree. Totally agree. We're going to close this panel discussion now. We have kept the questions that are in the Q&A, and we will ask them at the end of the session. Now what we're going to show you is a video of our SoloSIRENs collective artist, Samara Chedi, in a dance piece with music by Farah L. Enjoy. Thank you. We will now have a short break of 15 minutes and we'll see you back at 3:20 to discuss mentorship. Thank you all.